Okay, so we're just going to build this project up in small stages. You're going to need a Python IDE. I'm using Thonny, which is a good one, but you could just use the idle IDLE that comes with Python. So the first thing we need to do, because it's a graphical interface, is import the libraries that Python needs for the relevant elements such as buttons, labels, and so on. And we do this by importing a library called Kinter, the T is generally silent, and we need to export it as something so that we can use it, and it's kind of standard to go with TK. Now we're also going to need an element later on that comes from a newer library known as TTK, so we also need to import that. So from Kinter, we import TTK. Now, it should help you with your coding by color coding various elements. So you can see the keywords are currently showing up in pink, purple. Text comes up in green and so on. And this is kind of how it works. All right. I'm just going to make the font a little bit bigger so you can see it a little bit better. Right, and then the last thing we need to import for the ability to use the date is something called date time. Okay, and that is from a library just called date. All right, so these are existing libraries. There's nothing, they're not. I'm not making these up. These are libraries that already exist, and we are just basically telling Python that we want to use these, so we're importing them so we can do that. Now, it's a good idea to comment your code so you actually know what you're doing with this whole thing as you go along, and when you go back to it later, it helps you to remember what it was you were doing at this point. So hashtags turn anything you write in Python into a code, into a comment rather than a code, and so you can just remember. So I'm going to put a hashtag here, okay, for GUI. So that just reminds me that I've got to import all these things so I can use the graphical user interface, and this here is so that I can insert the date onto my form later on. Okay, so we've imported those three libraries. What we need to do now is use the TK library to basically draw a window so that we can actually begin to put some stuff on it. So again, I'm just going to put a little bit of a comment here to remind me that this next bit of code is for creating the window. Okay, and we can call this window whatever we like. Often you see people call it root. I'm going to call it window purely because it makes sense to me that if it's a window, I might call it a window, but you can call it whatever you want. And so we define a variable called window, and then that is equal to tk dot capital T K. So we're basically just telling Python we're going to use the TK library. So every time we use something on the window, we just have to put TK dot whatever it is we're using from the TK library, such as TK entry, TK button, things like that. Okay, and then we need a title for our window, and we do that by defining it with dot title. So it's TK window dot title, and then in brackets and in quotes, we want to give this title a name. So you can call it Builder PC, iCrash Computers. That's the name of the project that we're going to be doing for the assignment. Okay, so whatever we write in these two quotes, that becomes green. That's the bit that appears on the top of the window. And then the last thing we need to do is define how large we want this window using a command called geometry. So it's window.geometry, and this time using single quotes, we just define how big we want it to be. So 600, don't put spaces here because it won't work. You need to make sure you put the number, the X, and then the number. So you want, I don't know, something like 600 by 450, something like that. Don't forget to close your quotes and close your brackets. If you're going to have any issues with this as we go along, it'll be because you put the bracket in the wrong place, or you forgot to put a quotation mark in, or you forgot to close your bracket. You've only got one bracket when you should have two brackets, something like that. So remember to get this right. So this is enough to build a window. The very last line, always the very last line, for this bit of code, and it always appears at the bottom, so don't write anything below this, is a command to loop this window so that it just keeps displaying it permanently on the screen. And that is just window.main loop. Okay, and that'll just keep looping this window, open and close brackets. Now that should be enough for us to at least have a very rudimentary, basic, blank looking form that we can start putting things onto. So let's save this. Okay, so what I would suggest you do is in your documents folder, create a folder called iCrash or something like that. Because it makes sense just to kind of store everything in this one place. It's easy to find, it's easy to back up. So we'll call it iCrash. Okay, and again, I can maybe call this iCrash as well. Save that, and it should show you along the top of the window where it's saved, what it's called, etc. And then all we need to do is press this little green thing. If you're using the Python IDE, the idle that comes with it, then you can just do run and then run it. But it's pretty much always F5. What we should end up with, if it's working accurately, is a window that appears. Now I've typed something wrong in here, so just let me check what I've done. Oh, I've done that wrong, sorry. Okay, should be from date, time, import, date. That makes more sense. Okay. Okay, so there's the window. That's kind of what it looks like. All right. Now, as I've just done, you're going to make some mistakes with this. You're going to forget stuff. You're going to put things in the wrong place. It's just the nature of it. We don't panic about it. We look down the bottom in this window here, and we can see if we've got a syntax error. It'll tell us if there are any issues with things not being right. It usually tries to help us by pointing out where we've got wrong, and sometimes it'll even tell us what line it thinks it's on. And if you're using this Thonny interface, you get the assistant down the side here, which sometimes is useful. Sometimes you can just ignore it, especially if it's all working. But again, it'll help us here to figure out what's going wrong. And as you can see here, it's telling me that there's a problem with line 5. If I click this, it'll take me to line 5. It knows that there was a problem. But we fixed that now, so we can just ignore this. When we run the program again and then close it, you see the assistant analyzes the code again and tells us it's okay. It's telling us we've imported a couple of libraries that we haven't used, but that's okay because we know we've not used them. We know we're not going to use them until later on. So that's the first part of this project. Very basic kind of window. Now we start to put some writing and some things on this window, and then we start to work out calculations and things